My Husband Cheated on Me with Over 20 Women. A short story by Emma Lascaux, narrated today by Howard MacDonald.
Chapter 1. In the Shadow of Betrayal. Caroline Phillips sat in the silence of her tastefully decorated home, the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner echoing through the still air. The afternoon sunlight streamed in through the bay window, casting long dramatic shadows on the polished mahogany floor. She stared blankly at the canvas stretched out on the easel in front of her. Her paintbrush, which once moved with the rhythm of her soul, now hung limp in her hand. Her life had been a palette of predictable colours until 2 days ago, when her husband David, a renowned surgeon, had carelessly left his phone unlocked on the kitchen counter. She had picked it up, intent on reminding him not to forget his mother's birthday. What she found instead was a text message from an unknown number, a nameless woman with a familiar story. A story of love, deceit, and broken promises. The canvas in front of her reflected the chaos within her. Angry strokes of red clashed with the mournful blues, and the once hopeful hues of yellow were smeared beyond recognition. She felt like that canvas, marred and muddied, no longer the pristine white surface full of potential. Despite the whirlwind of emotions, Caroline kept a stoic facade. She was a Phillips after all. They were known for their stoic resilience, but the Phillips' resilience was not designed to withstand the storm that David had brought into their lives. Their story had been a fairy tale, the beautiful artist and the dashing doctor, both successful in their respective fields, their love story splashed across the society pages. They were envied, admired, and perhaps secretly resented. But the fairy tale was over now, replaced with a tragic saga of deceit. David was not just unfaithful, he was a serial adulterer, and Caroline had become an unwitting participant in this sordid drama, playing the role of the deceived wife. The weight of this newfound identity pressed heavily on her, suffocating her under its enormity. She looked around the room, her eyes lingering on the portraits of her and David. Each frame told a lie, a fabrication of marital bliss that had been carefully maintained for over a decade. She felt a sudden urge to hurl the paintbrush at them, to deface the smiling lies, but she didn't. Instead, she let the paintbrush fall from her hand, the soft thud echoing her surrender. The grandfather clock chimed, breaking the silence. The sound was a painful reminder of time moving on, regardless of her stillness. She needed to move too, not just physically, but from the spot of betrayal and hurt that had been her dwelling place for the last 2 days. Slowly, she picked up the paintbrush again. This time, she would paint her own story, not the one she had been living. The strokes were firm, the colours bold. The picture was far from complete, but for the first time in many days, Caroline Phillips felt a sense of control. Her journey had just begun, a journey from the shadow of betrayal towards the light of self-discovery. Chapter 2. A Symphony of Secrets. For the next few days, Caroline immersed herself in her art. She poured every shred of her agony, every speck of her anger onto the canvas. The more she painted, the more she felt a strange sense of liberation. It was as though with every stroke, she was releasing a part of the pain that had clung onto her so stubbornly. She also started investigating. Each discovery was a new wound, a fresh stab at her already bruised heart. David had been leading a double life for years, a symphony of secrets where he was the conductor. The list of his paramours was staggering. All of them were independent, successful women who, like her, were completely unaware of David's deceit. She also found out that David had been siphoning off money from their joint account, money that was being funneled to support his extravagant affairs. The financial betrayal, though not as soul-crushing as the emotional one, was a bitter pill to swallow. Caroline started to wonder about the man she had married. The charming, charismatic man who had swept her off her feet was turning out to be a mere facade. She had fallen in love with a mirage, a carefully crafted illusion of a man who didn't exist. As the days passed, the silence of her home became oppressive, each tick of the grandfather clock a painful reminder of her loneliness. The portraits on the wall seemed to mock her, their joyful expressions a cruel contrast to her anguish. In a fit of rage, she tore them all down, their glass frames shattering, much like her life. She decided to confront David. It was time he faced the consequences of his actions. But she wouldn't do it in the confines of their home. She would do it in a place where he couldn't escape, couldn't spin another web of lies. She knew exactly where she would confront him, at the annual medical conference, where he would be delivering the keynote address. The thought of his shocked expression brought a grim smile to her face. She would play her own symphony, and he would be forced to listen. The days leading up to the conference were a blur. Caroline prepared herself, steeling her nerves for the confrontation. She wasn't the naive woman she once was. She was stronger, more determined. She was ready to face David, ready to expose his secrets. The day of the conference arrived. Caroline sat in the audience, her heart pounding in her chest. She watched as David walked onto the stage, his charismatic smile winning over the crowd. The applause faded and he started his speech. Caroline's hand clenched around the evidence she had gathered, the proof of David's double life. It was time to bring down the curtain on David's symphony of secrets. Chapter 3: The Art of Deception, a Gallery Unveiled. As David held the audience captive with his eloquent speech, Caroline's resolve solidified. When the time came for the question and answer session, she rose from her seat, her heart pounding like a war drum in her chest. As she stepped into the aisle, she could feel all eyes on her. The murmurs of recognition rippled through the room. Caroline waited for the microphone to be passed to her. She glanced at David, who looked at her with a surprised smile. He had no idea about the storm that was about to descend. "My question is not related to your medical expertise, David," Caroline said, her voice steady. She could see his smile falter slightly. "It's about your personal life." A gasp echoed in the room. David's smile faded completely. He looked at her, his confusion evident. Caroline took a deep breath and continued. "How do you balance your personal life with your professional one, given that you've had over 20 extramarital affairs in the last 10 years? The room plunged into stunned silence. David stood frozen on the stage, his face paling. Caroline could hear her heartbeat thundering in her ears. She took out the papers she had brought with her, the damning evidence of David's deceit, and held them up for everyone to see. "This," she said, her voice echoing through the room, "is the art of deception, a gallery of betrayal. These are the names, the messages, the bank transactions. This is the truth about David Phillips, the man you all admire." The aftermath was a whirlwind. The press swarmed around her, bombarding her with questions. The conference turned into chaos. David was escorted off the stage, his face a mask of shock and shame. Caroline walked out of the conference room, her head held high. She had done it. She had unveiled David's gallery of deceit. But the victory was bittersweet. As she walked out into the night, the reality of her situation settled in. She was alone, her marriage a sham, but she was free from the lies, the deceit, the illusion of a happy marriage. As she drove home, the city lights flickered around her. Her life had been upended, her world turned upside down, but in the midst of all the chaos, she felt a strange sense of peace. She had taken control of her life. She had fought back. Her journey was far from over. The road to recovery would be long and painful, but she was ready. She was not the same woman who had discovered her husband's betrayal. She was stronger, fiercer, and most importantly, she was free. Chapter 4. Broken Vows, Shattered Illusions. The fallout from the public confrontation was swift and catastrophic. David was suspended from the hospital pending an internal review. The media had a field day, the scandal providing fresh fodder for their sensational headlines. And amidst it all, Caroline found herself in an unfamiliar spotlight, her private life laid bare for public consumption. Despite the chaos, Caroline found a certain calm within herself. She had survived the storm, she had faced her worst fears, and she was still standing. The woman who stood amidst the ruins of her life was not the same woman who had discovered David's infidelities. She was stronger, hardened by betrayal, tempered by pain. Meanwhile, David was busy playing the victim. He claimed his indiscretions were a result of stress, of losing himself in the demanding world of medicine. He played the repentant sinner, begging for Caroline's forgiveness in tearful interviews. But Caroline was not swayed. She saw through his performance, the last desperate act of a man who had lost everything. The legal proceedings began. Caroline filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. She watched as David squirmed in the courtroom, his charming facade crumbling under the stern gaze of the judge. The proceedings were lengthy and bitter, but Caroline remained resolute. In the end, the divorce was granted. Caroline walked out of the courtroom a free woman. She had lost a husband, but she had found herself. The woman who emerged from the shattered illusions of her marriage was not the naive bride who had believed in happily ever afters. She was a survivor, a woman who had stared betrayal in the face and emerged victorious. But her victory was not without its losses. She had lost her trust, her belief in love. She found herself navigating a world that was both familiar and foreign. Her home felt empty, the silence a harsh reminder of her solitude. Yet she was not defeated. She had survived the worst, and she was ready to face whatever came next. And so, Caroline began the next chapter of her life, a life that was not defined by her relationship, but by her resilience. She threw herself into her art, her canvas a testament to her journey. Her artwork became darker, more intense. It was no longer just a hobby, but a lifeline, a way for her to express her pain, her anger, her strength. As she navigated her way through the broken vows and shattered illusions, Caroline found a new purpose. She decided to use her experience, her pain, to help others. She started a support group for women who had faced similar betrayals. She shared her story, her journey from victim to survivor, and in doing so, she found a new family, a sisterhood of women who had been scarred by betrayal but refused to be defined by it. Caroline's journey was far from over. There were days when the pain threatened to consume her, days when the loneliness felt overwhelming, but she was not alone. She had a sisterhood standing with her, supporting her, and with each passing day, she was healing, becoming stronger. She was no longer just Caroline Phillips, the woman who was cheated on by her husband. She was Caroline Phillips, the survivor, the warrior, the beacon of hope for others, and that was a title she wore with pride. Chapter 5. A Parade of Paramours, The Unlikely Sisterhood. News of Caroline's support group spread like wildfire. Women from all walks of life, each bearing the scars of infidelity, began to gather. Among them were several of David's former mistresses, women who had been deceived just as much as Caroline. They had been lured by the same charm, lied to with the same ease, and discarded with the same cold-hearted indifference. Initially it was awkward. They were, after all, bound by a painful shared experience, but as they began to share their stories, their anger, their humiliation, an unusual bond started to form. They found strength in their shared pain, a sense of empowerment that only those who had walked in their shoes could understand. They were no longer just victims of David's deceit, but comrades in a battle they hadn't chosen. Caroline became the pillar of this unlikely sisterhood. Her strength, her grace under pressure, inspired the others. She led by example, showing them that they could rise from the ashes of their broken hearts, stronger and fiercer. Together, they navigated the treacherous waters of betrayal, each one finding solace and strength in their shared journey. Their meetings became a sanctuary, a place where they could shed their masks and be their true, vulnerable selves. The women, including Caroline, found a newfound sense of self-worth and confidence. They started to heal, to grow, their shared pain becoming a catalyst for their personal growth. In the midst of it all, Caroline found an unexpected ally in Victoria, one of David's former mistresses. A successful lawyer, Victoria had been just as blindsided by David's deceit. Despite the awkwardness of their situation, a bond formed between the two women. They found common ground in their shared pain, their determination to rise above the betrayal. Victoria became a key member of the group, her legal expertise proving invaluable as they navigated the complex aftermath of their shared deceit. As time passed, Caroline found herself looking forward to the meetings. They were no longer just about healing from their past, but about building a future. They shared their dreams, their hopes, their fears. They laughed, they cried, they grew together. They were no longer just a group of women bound by betrayal, but a sisterhood, a family. Meanwhile, David's life continued to spiral out of control. His reputation was in tatters, his career on the brink of collapse. He watched from the sidelines as Caroline, the woman he had betrayed, rose from the ashes, stronger and more determined. His attempts at reconciliation fell on deaf ears. Caroline had moved on, leaving him behind in the wreckage of his own making. As Caroline looked at the faces of the women in her group, she felt a strange sense of contentment. She had found a purpose, a cause worth fighting for. She had turned her pain into power, her betrayal into a beacon of hope. She had taken control of her narrative, becoming the author of her own story, and as she looked forward to the future, she knew that she was not alone. She had an army of women standing with her, ready to face whatever came their way. They were survivors, warriors, a parade of paramours who had found an unlikely sisterhood in the aftermath of betrayal. Chapter 6. Resilience, a New Dawn. Months turned into years. The support group, now fondly called the Phoenix Sisters, thrived. They became a beacon of hope, their stories inspiring countless others. Caroline's art, now brimming with raw emotion and resilience, started to gain recognition. Galleries across the city exhibited her work, her journey of healing resonating with those who saw it. Caroline's world was different, but she was different too. No longer the woman trapped in a loveless marriage, she was now a symbol of strength, of resilience. Her journey had not been easy, but it had shaped her, molded her into the woman she was today. David, on the other hand, was a mere shadow of his former self. His career never recovered from the scandal, and he lived in a self-imposed exile, the guilt of his actions his only company. He watched from afar as Caroline thrived, a bitter reminder of the life he had lost. Despite the pain of the past, Caroline found herself at peace. She had found a purpose in her pain, a sisterhood in her solitude. She had turned her scars into stars, her agony into art. She had not just survived, but thrived. One day, while strolling through a park, Caroline came across a couple. They were young, their eyes filled with the same naive hope she once had. She watched them from a distance, their laughter echoing in the air. Once, the sight would have brought tears to her eyes, a painful reminder of what she had lost, but not today. Today, she felt a sense of contentment. She had survived the storm, and she was stronger for it. As she walked away, she felt a sense of closure. She had faced her demons, she had navigated the treacherous waters of betrayal, and she had come out stronger. She was not the same woman who had walked into that conference room years ago. She was a survivor, a warrior, a phoenix who had risen from the ashes of her old life. As the sun set, painting the sky with hues of orange and purple, Caroline felt a sense of peace wash over her. Her journey had been painful, her path fraught with challenges, but as she looked at the setting sun, she knew that a new dawn awaited her, a dawn where she was not defined by her past, but by her resilience, a dawn where she was not just a victim, but a victor. And so, as the sun set on her past, Caroline welcomed the dawn of her new life, a life where she was not just Caroline Phillips, the woman who was cheated on by her husband. She was Caroline Phillips, the survivor, the warrior, the artist. She was Caroline Phillips, the phoenix, ready to embrace the new dawn with open arms.
We hope you enjoyed this short story. To hear more stories like this one, why not subscribe to the Romance Diaries and hit the bell icon so that you can get notified each time we put out a new story or confession. That way you won't need to miss a thing. Or if you'd like to experience your own true life romance, why not visit one of our sponsors by clicking a link in the description.